it's just amazing the transformation that's been happening for the last 10 years in Dallas. It's kind of overwhelming. You never have time to see everything that's happening, and very distinctly different from when I used to come out here in the 80s, and it felt like I was in a scene from RoboCop. So it's really says something for, I think, the citizens and from the leadership in Dallas, and it's just great to be in a small way part of that really dynamic, I would say, activity that's happening in the city all around the idea of design as something that enriches our lives. So I want to get started here because they've given me a limited amount of time, and I don't want to get a hook, be pulled off the stage here. So I've got to start out with this building. I always start out with this building. It's my favorite building in the world, known as the God Barn in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And it's it's native to its own region, but it's imbued in many ways with a very universal appeal. And its original purpose is transformed with this sort of new program that's painted all over it, but that allows it simultaneously to be local and at once universal. And as an architect, as was noted by Ian, working between and even beyond vernaculars, what I seek to do in many ways is to make my own corner of the world stand for the whole. And this is what we've been doing the last 25 years, working out in what we like to call the Ozark Outback. This corner is a space betwixt and between transition and ambiguity, and our work seeks to intensify this condition by defamiliarizing our relationship to it. And so what we've been doing for quite some time is taking a more transgressive position that provides our work with specificity that's drawn from the particulars of place. I've always thought of good writers as those that work in the realm of the particulars. And so too, we'd like to look at the particulars of the local in an attempt to situate the universal. So anyways, the God Barn, unfortunately, doesn't exist anymore. It got torn down, but the memory is still very strong there. When Princeton approached us about doing a monograph, which I always felt was much too early. In fact, I call it the monograph of the early work. But as Faye Jones, a good friend and mentor, said, he always designed or worked on projects, whatever came through the door. He never marketed or went after projects. And so when I told him, I said, I thought this was a little bit early. And he's like, well, it came through your door, didn't it? So we got on board. But one of the things they wanted was this iconic image of our place. And we've always thought of the Ozarks as that intersection of hills and valleys. And Fayetteville especially is the only town in northwest Arkansas built on hills. So you can literally stand in the downtown in certain areas and look out and see farms and horses and chicken houses and that sort of thing. So what we did is found this valley here, and on the top, this silhouette is Old Main, the oldest building on the University of Arkansas campus, and this cow or the new calf, the whole intersection of culture and agriculture, and we thought, man, this is it. And just as we went to take the photo, a Walmart truck drives right through the middle of it, and it was like, well, of course, we forgot about the center of commerce as well and distribution of goods and the whole Walmart, Tyson Chicken, J.B. Hunt Trucking, all of that makes us such a vital economy. Now, we like to call where I live the land of Bill and a billion chickens. We got more chickens than any other place in the country. And with those chickens come all these chicken houses. And there are thousands of them all throughout the northwest Arkansas landscape. And what's interesting about them is wherever you are in the landscape, and if you see one of these, you almost always know where you are because they're almost always oriented east-west. Because the chicken farmers figured out pretty quickly that if they could minimize the sun on the east and the west side, the more narrow parts of the chicken house, that the chickens wouldn't cook before their time. And that kind of pragmatism really kind of, made sense to us. Look, just common sense approaches to how we situate ourselves in our place. And so that's what we try to do is instill that in a lot of the work that we do. Now, we're located, by many people's opinion, in the middle of nowhere, but we're actually close to everywhere. Because of Walmart, we have more direct flights than any other small place in the country, direct to New York, to D.C., L.A., Dallas, everywhere. So it's a place that many people consider a place of real natural beauty and simultaneously a place of real constructed ugliness. And it's a place often considered somewhat aesthetically and even culturally impoverished, which is not the case at all, but that's a perception. And words like erasure, abandonment, exploitation, nostalgia, they're all parts or aspects of this place and are just as real in many ways as the local form and the beauty, the natural beauty that you find there. And, we don't see that really as a negative. In fact, this place that we work in has not just become a setting for our work, but really has become part of our work. So what we try to do is not see a negative, but in fact see possibilities in direct experience with the world as it's given to us in our efforts to retranslate it in a world as we'd like to find it. And so, what we've been able to do is turn over the rock and discover the underbelly of our place, all the visceral presences and expressive character that really sustains our efforts there. Now, I'm working from a very simple conviction, is that architecture is larger than the subject of architecture. So what we try to do is put on a wide-angle microscopic lens to look very closely at the world, to find ways to generate ideas and actions from our engagement with this place or particular places, to operate between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between one's own personal history and the history of our discipline. Some of you may recognize this building on the left. It's the masterwork of E. Fay Jones, the true master architect of the Ozarks, in my opinion, who also won the AIA Gold Medal in 1990, a protege of Frank Lloyd Wright. This building, we've taken everybody to. We've taken Kai from Big there. We've taken Jacques Herzog, Pierre de Meuron, Peter Zumthor, Clinton Murcutt. The list goes on. And no matter what their sensibilities are, these architects almost always have the same visceral kind of reaction to it, because in many ways it's architecture at the highest level. Now, it's in Eureka Springs, not far from where I live, and just across town in Eureka Springs is another icon in the landscape as well. It's part of a tourist attraction called the Passion Play, and people go there to see the life of Christ acted out by actors. And they had designed this really tall icon of Christ to be seen from miles and miles. And as they were erecting him, they were informed by the FAIA is that you're going to have to put a flashing blue light on the top of his head. And of course, they'd no way they were going to do that. So rather than redesign him, they just lopped him off at the knees and pushed him back into the ground. So he's got these proportions of a milk carton, and he's known as Milk Carton. This is Milk Carton Jesus, as it's known in Arkansas. So I show this to you just to show the kind of highs and lows of what we operate between. Now, we don't see our mission as trying to resolve one to the other, but in fact to try to develop resonance between these conditions through the things that we make. And so it's to force us to become very careful observers of the biological, the geological, and always the cultural aspects of our place, in which we've been able to develop a more bottom-up process that allows us to, amplify the small things that manifest the large things. So in that line of thinking, we can say in the words of the great poet, William Carlos Williams, in his poem Patterson, is that there are no ideas but in things. And as contemporary architects and designers, that allows us to engage some very critical questions. One is, how do we embrace the world without being consumed by it? And secondly, how do we enrich and dignify the experience of being in the world for those who engage our work? This is an ongoing set of questions and challenges in every project that we do. Now, Leonardo da Vinci spoke very eloquently, I think, about working from the direct experience of things when he said, it should not be so hard for you to stop sometimes and look into the ashes of a fire or cloud or mud or light places in which you may find really marvelous ideas. And so all we're trying to do is, out of the muck of our own condition, is to find really marvelous ideas. I think in many ways it's safe to say that most architecture isn't very good, and most good architecture is good enough for most days, but there is some architecture, some buildings that needs to rise above the everyday, and this necessarily challenges us to return to the significance of the everyday and revalidate it and enrich it through the things that we make. So we are always looking for analogies and analogs between the world of the nature-made and the world of the culture-made, and finding relationships and sources of inspirations there. We are operating between the motivating forces of the everyday, in fact, where things are at once strange and yet familiar. In fact, we see our task in many ways as the task of recreating strangeness. We operate between the ideal and the improvised, and again, we don't see it as a negative. In fact, we find ways to take the everyday, to develop operations that can represent the world, represent forms in new and varied ways, that is at once part of a place and yet part of a larger discourse, a larger kind of universal language. And this, we believe, makes a very productive tension, that thing about defamiliarizing and having us in our direct engagement with these projects to reconstruct our world in some ways around them. Now, when I was very young, I was really a cartoonist before I decided to become an architect. And I drew everything in profile as a visage, and everything as a type of section. And so all of our projects are sort of developed that way, start out that way, in section, in profile, as a way to develop a reductive form of expressive character. Now, I would have been a cartoonist until I read this article that said that most cartoonists have some form of an alcohol problem. And as a young teenager, I said, I certainly don't want to be involved in that in any way. So I decided to become an architect instead, only to discover there's a host of other issues, including alcohol, with that. So, but in any event, so we do, on every project, we do these, I think, really wonderful diagrams, silhouettes, and we make a kind of whole lexicon just to kind of keep track of all the different types of ways to be expressive just in section and profile, the kind of fugitive nature of the silhouette. So, that's allowed us to kind of engage a variety of different types of projects. We believe typologies are adaptive, they are evolutionary, they are dynamic, they are not fixed. It's a fixed typology becomes a discussion in many ways often about style instead. So in this case, we had an opportunity to do a tower house, a house in the woods right in Fayetteville, Arkansas, looking at the local chicken feed mills, our own travels to places like Lucca, Italy, or to Yemen, where people live in vertical 7-story towers with the social space, the main social space on the top, the mafraj. But we had to look at the local site, what nature had provided us, the textures and patterns, the striated bark of the white oak. We milled white oak about 20 miles away to develop this white oak rain, or not a rain screen, it's really an oak lattice fin that wraps the stairway, and it creates a datum for the mature height of the oak trees. Our oaks don't get very big in this part of Arkansas. It's because our cash crop is rocks. We've got a lot of rocks, and things just don't get really tall, not like the Delta in any way. But once you get up above the trees, there becomes a whole nother order in the landscape. These agricultural and industrial buildings that pump or punch through the canopy that are all detailed in white metal panels or concrete panels, and we wanted to be part of that order. So we developed our own white metal skin and then let it slip over the wood like a husk, a thin layered husk, and becomes its own system of articulation and creating a kind of, again, a local and a universal identity for this particular project. And once you get into it, it really becomes a place about view and the act of viewing. The observation room, the living room essentially, with a 360-degree view of the horizon in all directions, and then a stair folds out of the ceiling. You go up, and you're into a room with controlled views to the landscape, but no roof. It's open to the sky above, a great place to take in a meal, sleep under the stars, and it's really pretty amazing during the equinox as the sun and moon are in the same place in the sky at the equinox, and you sit between these two slots and see that. It's pretty wild. Another small project I did this was for my old girlfriend's mother. I tell college students, I said, if you get dumped in a relationship and they ask you to be your friend, you at least consider the possibilities. So I never got to do my mother's house, but I got to do my ex-girlfriend's mother's house. So I did her house, and about 10 years later, she came back. She'd become a beekeeper. This is in Cashiers, North Carolina. And said, I need a place to take the honeycomb and extract it with a centrifuge and bottle it and put it out on the market for sale or even alongside the road, and I need a outdoor workplace as well. And so we developed this little structure we call the honey house. It's 8 foot wide by 24 feet long. It was all fabricated in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and shipped to North Carolina, and then we kind of erected it in about 3 weeks there. But we focused on one primary architectural element, a wall, a load-bearing wall made of steel plate, quarter-inch steel plate, and faceted glass that also acted as the storage and display of the honey and as a type of brise-soleil. And the faceted glass created deep space in the wall where small birds and insects nest in it, so it's imbued in many ways with the order of change. It never looks the same in any season, and then fuses itself with conditions of opacity, transparency, and translucency with the site around it. $40,000 project that we, quite proud of. So another typology we were introduced to was the golf clubhouse, Blessings Golf Clubhouse in Johnson, Arkansas. We were approached by John Tyson of Tyson Foods, who was building a golf course, and said, I need a clubhouse, but I don't want what everybody else has. You know, that clubhouse that looks like a hunting lodge or Terra, a plantation home. He said, could you give me something that is of our place, but part of the 21st century, but respects the traditional rituals and program of a golf clubhouse, of the game of golf. And so we came up with this idea of a very simple figure in the landscape, again, using our cash crop rocks as a dry stack stone base, and then a tube wrapped in copper that sits astride that, and providing all kinds of frame views out to the landscape and beautiful natural light within the spaces as well. And a few surprises that you wouldn't expect to find, like this top-lit Roman bath at the end of the hall here, a kind of really nice setting. Of course, when this was on Art Daily, somebody blogged and said, hey, Peter Zumthor called and would like his Baz back. And I was just like, oh, man, God, was I channeling that? God, dog it. And then about 3 or 4 hours later, somebody else said, and the Romans called Peter, they'd like their Baz back. So in many ways, it's all part of a continuum. But it's one of those things that, we're also, as architects, designers, said, we really have to educate your clients. But so often I find that my clients educate me. When we were asked to do this, I informed Mr. Tyson, I said, I don't know why you're asking us to do this. I don't know anything about golf. I don't think I could even hit a golf ball. And he said, dude, it's not about golf. It's about people and space. I said, well, I can do that. So, he understood what the project was about and what, we could contribute to it. Now, this idea of typologies being evolutionary and adaptive never was more true in this particular project. Post-Katrina, a house for the Architecture for Humanity in Biloxi, Mississippi. Biloxi being the only town post-Katrina that rejected the new urbanist plan for the Gulf Coast. They decided that not everybody wants to live in grandma's house with a geranium on the porch. They needed somebody to seriously take on the new FEMA regulations that demanded that all new structures be elevated 6 to 11 feet above the streets, and which has great urbanistic and social implications in a town like Biloxi. There were 7 model homes, and ours was just one of them, but we started with the typology of the shotgun house, and of course very conscious of the fact that the porch, the southern porch, is that interface between the private world of the home and the public world of the street. And so we wanted to keep that on the street, engaged with that, and then elevate the house, and then make it more concise. So we stacked the program so that it could be this could be used on a variety of different types of sites, and that evolved to what we call the porch dog house. And this is a market rate house for $135 a square foot that is a prototype for how to deal with Category 4 storm surges and winds. It's all primarily concrete block at the base with some minor steel, a moment frame in the big front, and the rest is all wood and wrapped in metal. And very simple strategies here. that allow it to be resistive to the forces of nature. I love this. This is a Katrina cottage the new urbanist came up with. It sits right next to it, which I really love this photo because I know after the next Category 4 storm, which house will not be there. So anyways, this is the danger, I think, of getting too locked into style. So this volatile condition between land and water is something we've contended with on several projects. Recently, the Indianapolis Museum of Art's Art and Nature Park, the visitor center for that. We worked with Ed Blake out of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and Mary Miss, a really great environmental artist, on this project for several years. It's an interesting site. It's in an oxbow of the White River that runs through the middle of Indianapolis. There's a canal also that runs through Indianapolis that cuts it off from its campus, this sort of triangle you see, which is the Indianapolis Museum of Art's campus. And originally it was just pristine forest, and then it became a farmer's pasture, and then it became a quarry. They dug back in the 50s to provide limestone for the interstates that went through Indianapolis, and then it filled up with water and became an amenity in the middle of the city. So we were asked to deal with this site full of invasives and all kinds of things and that Ed had to deal with, and create a series of pathway journeys to experience it and site-specific art by artists that were invited. But the problem with this site is that in the last 10 years, it's had over 3 100-year floods because of indiscriminate development upriver. And so the river rises above the lake and then breaches into the lake and scours the landscape and then breaches back into the river. And in fact, out of 100 acres, when you consider floodways and flood zones and easements and everything, we only had 0.67 acres to build on. So it was very easy to find our site in the context of all this. So you can see our site is up here, and it's really an extension of these pathway journeys. It's not necessarily a destination in itself. But Ed came up with all these ways to introduce you to different ecotones in the park, and site-specific art by Team A out of Brooklyn, and these wonderful little plazas made from recycled, repurposed debris that was found on the site, wood and limestone blocks, and great towpath along the canal and bridges. Our site was wet, fecund. It's in a woodland. This is it in the floods. In fact, what we were required to do was lift it 5 feet above the forest floor, which is a kind of awkward thing to do. It's right at eye level. And Ed had been looking at my sketches because I really wanted the building to sort of emerge from the landscape with these big pathways, extension of these pathways that anybody in a wheelchair or whatever could rise up onto the building and take a respite in the woods here. And so he came up with this idea of figured mounds that rise about 3.5 feet out of the forest floor and point you to specific views in the landscape. And then the water flows underneath them. And it's a very kind of beautiful, subtle gesture in the land, and this building sits astride, floating just about a foot above it, and it becomes a type of apparition in the woods. A very quiet building, a very strong building and very light. We wanted to use one material, one detail. So we're using 2x4 epay to develop the deck, the wall, and the canopy. And we looked at things like the microscopic images of a butterfly to see something very light and strong, or these leaves we found on the site that had been eaten away by insects. They had a porosity to the surface, but they were quite strong. The structure was quite intact of the leaf. And it reminded me of the canopy of the forest that allows for water and air and light to come through, and it cools the forest in some ways. And so we wanted to develop a structure that was an analog to that. So this is an exoskeleton surfaced in this epay, and then pleated in certain areas in the system to allow for figured rainfall or snowfall or light to come through it. What's interesting about this, I worked with a wonderful structural engineer, Guy Nordenson, and he designed it in such a way that you'd only see the structure through its shadow. So it imprints its shadow on the screen, and that shadow is constantly moving because the sun moves, and it intensifies that movement. So this is a building that pulsates with the rhythms of the day and the season. And to get it past code, we had to infill the gaps for the deck with 1x2 UV-rated acrylic bars. And then we light that up at night, and it becomes this nice apparition in the woods. And very simple, just a glass vitrine with a cedar box that's been charred with fire that helps give it a fire rating and protect it from rot and insects. And they just sort of come together as a solid and a void. At the inside, lots of nice natural light, water-popped, ebonized white oak, slightly polished like it's up at the museum. But the wrapper, it's kind of like a big taco in a way. The wrapper turns silver. It ages over time. And this is it sitting in the woods. It's a kind of abstraction in the wood with this wrapper that ages every year. And then, of course, the killer shot you got to have, or hopefully a cover on something. This was the first national AIA award winner for the whole city of Indianapolis. And they really love it. It's a 1,200 square foot structure that the city has really kind of fallen in love with. Gets a lot of attention. So we've just completed a project in Memphis, again thinking about water again, in perhaps a little bit different way. We worked with field conditions, James Corner's office out of New York. It is the largest urban park in the United States. It's 4,500 acres. Memphis, of course, I love. I think one of my favorite southern cities. It's the birthplace of rock and roll. I love this. Is coming from Arkansas to western side of Memphis and downtown, and of course, I always loved going down to Beale Street, party a little bit. But I got to thinking, at the same time that rock and roll was coming alive in the 50s, on the east side of Memphis there was something completely different, which was a 4,500 acre farm, a penal farm, where prisoners basically worked the land in the hot summer sun, raising food to feed themselves and other citizens in the county. And this went on for many years, I think 40 years, until it fell out of favor as a kind of rehabilitation program. And so the land became designated to the county, who really didn't know how to maintain 4,500 acres. So a nonprofit emerged out of that, and it became a city park. This is downtown Memphis here on your left. This is the size of Shelby Farms. It's actually larger than the downtown. It has, in the middle of it, a lake. And so what the folks at the park had wanted to do is develop and expand the lake, develop the landscape around it, and really make a heart of the park come alive, and have a series of structures that would create revenue streams to sustain the park. And we were asked to do 7 of those structures. And there's an ensemble of structures that include a visitor center, a restaurant retreat center, a multipurpose event center, a stage pavilion, boat kiosk, picnic pavilions, those sorts of things. Working very closely with JCFO to locate these in the landscape in a proper way. And we really saw these as a series of figures, who would talk to each other, would be in dialogue, again, like an ensemble. And one of the things we noticed in the park is that no matter where we went in the park, if there were shade, there were people. No shade, no people. And we got to thinking, it's like, well, we got these buildings in the middle of the landscape, and it used to be a big kind of pasture and everything. It was like, well, what would happen if we developed buildings where each one provided its own shade in some form? And so that became a sort of the beginnings of a language, a porch language. And this is the landscape here. You can see it from above. Very beautiful pastoral landscape that we wanted to have unobstructed views. They've even got a herd of buffalo there, which I didn't know they had in Tennessee. Rock and roll buffalo sort of thing. So we started just looking at, going back to origins a little bit, the simple sharecropper's house with its porch. Way before there was AC, this is the way you cool down, is get out of the house. But also, things like these big ag sheds, dog trots that create their own breezes and that sort of thing. And so that led to the first building, which is a visitor center. It's an 8,000 square foot building with an 8,000 square foot porch. And that was achieved through a monster cantilever, which you got to have, And we got to thinking about, being in Memphis is not unlike being in Dallas sometimes. It gets hot here, doesn't it? And if the breeze isn't blowing, doesn't matter where you're standing, you're sweating. So we came up by embedding in the carapace here 5 20-foot big-ass fans. So that's the trademark on it. I'm not trying to be crass. But so these fans rotate and they cool the air here so they can use this year-round and program events and create another revenue stream. It's all made up of a giant truss and steel, kind of industrial ag sort of structure, wrapped in aluminum bar grate, so it really breathes and it has a kind of translucency to it. With second growth cypress that we could get locally. These breezeways that generate their own breezes, their entry, as the building becomes a kind of extended threshold that takes you to the landscape. You move through a bosque that JCFO came through that is just kind of growing in now. So here we are kind of moving through, boom, and pow. And then the shade, which stays, or the porch that stays in shade pretty much most of the year. Of course, everything is programmed along that edge, the gift shop, the lobby, the classrooms. One unfortunate buffalo who's now become the mascot for the park. And just very simple, you can kind of begin to see that translucency. All the bottom half operates on hinges so that it can open up and create clear views or be cleaning the glass and that sort of thing. So very, very nice, just a simple building that creates its own shade. And then at night, it lights up and becomes a beacon or a lantern even in the middle of the park. And I like showing this. This is right after a party that they had in June last year. 95 degrees. It had just rained earlier. It was 95% humidity, and nobody was sweating. And the fans were working overtime, but it was really, really great to see how this building performed and made it just a great place to be. So a small, another figure in the landscape, the stage pavilion that presents itself both to the park and to the lake, as well as a boat kiosk filled with kayaks and canoes, a concession stand. It's like a little nymph that crawled out of the water. And then creating its own shade, pull the boats out here, get it rigged up and put it in the water. Picnic pavilions we call the crickets. They're kind of littered around the park, creating their own shade as well. And I don't have a photo of this. We haven't really professionally photographed this yet, but it's the Restaurant Retreat Center. Kimball Musk, if you know Elon Musk, his brother has a series of restaurants. He's farm-to-table restaurants. It's kind of like a farm around it where they get food, and a wonderful restaurant. The big thing is the porch, though. It's a 70-foot deep porch with more people outside than inside. 3-month reservation wait to get to have a dinner out on the sunset, for the sunset here. It's quite lovely, all facing west, so we're knocking down that sun. And then the figures kind of come to life at night as silhouettes as that change from the day to the dusk. So I'm going to shift gears on you just a little bit. We've kind of been in kind of a rural condition, but it's very often rural conditions, they don't stay rural, at least not where I live. Increasingly, they're being annexed and becoming more suburban. And you see gated communities, gated office parks, a whole host of development, franchises. In fact, I brought a fellow come visit us from D.C., and he landed at the airport, and we're driving to our place. He says, this is the beigest place I've ever been. Lots of beige, lots of signage, and I never thought of it like this, the land of beige, and a land of too many materials, and a land of too many moves. In fact, I think, it's a good test to give yourself. If you pull into a parking lot in suburbia and you get out to go to the local strip mall or building or, whatever franchise, and you see 8 different materials before you get to the front door, there's a problem. If you get out of your car and you go to the building and before you get there you see 8 different formal moves, there's a problem. There's the ersatz that's, kind of all the thing in suburban. So we wanted to challenge that. We had an opportunity to do a building in suburbia, a pediatric clinic, and we thought this is an opportunity to resist the prevailing winds. And we thought of the singular figure in the landscape, the barn, and the power of that was part of this agricultural landscape for so long that had been converted to suburban. We wanted to bring that figure and the power of that back. So this is our pediatric clinic in Rogers, Arkansas. And this is facing south as you kind of approach it. The exam rooms didn't need windows. They wanted privacy, so we provided skylit exam rooms all along it. So we didn't have to have windows there. And so we just thought, let's just make a great gestalt figure that anybody can recognize, an icon, a sign in its own right. And this is the context it sits in. And so, indeed, the land of beige, the only other icons recognizable are over here. And so, it's a pretty aggressive stance, but, it's something that we felt was important. Here's the plaza right here with its parking spaces removed. So it has an urban aspect. You actually drive around it and through here, and you drop patients off, the kids, and there's a kind of a stairway that bounces around here. It takes you up to a reception area. And then up here is a loft for the doctors waiting on call for surgery at the local hospital, and their own private staff entrance here. So the staff and the public don't have to mix as they start the day. And as you drive by it, we really thought of this as something you could also experience at 40 miles an hour. So as you're driving by, there's the east-facing Brise Soleil. You start coming by, and you begin to realize that it's a different building on the other side, and it completely transforms to the north. And so it really is seeing itself as a figure, as an icon, as a sign in the suburban condition. So, as I said, you have this lobby that you come into here. We thought about kids coming here. They're already not feeling well. What could we do to sort of begin to kind of decompress them, to kind of give them something of wonder? So we bathed all of the stairway in blue light coming from stained blue glass skylights from above. And so this is no paint or anything. It's just blue light that is constantly shifting as they ascend the stairs up to the lobby up above, the waiting room up above here. And you kind of see the blue on the left. So just, again, something that is unexpected, that hopefully helps in some way. And then, of course, the view back out to the highway here with the Brise Soleil controlling that sun. We now have artwork and everything in here. This hasn't really been professionally shot either. But, really humane rooms for the kids to be seen with natural light and a kind of warmth to those. Even those that work there, the nurses' stations in the middle of the building, which typically wouldn't get light from above as well to make that really quite comfortable. And then light as you move through. So it's a simple plan, a kind of plan that you move around. You don't have to loop back. This is the loft area where the doctors hang out and staff, and then they have the lounge up above. And then the porch in the back is for the staff as well. So it is really a balance between the patients and the staff and making it a really great environment for healing, but an environment for work as well. And then some of the last images here. So this is like the third time I've shown this building since it's got, so I really appreciate sharing that with you. The suburban condition is something we want to continue to kind of engage, because it is something that is, I think, taken for granted, and we just sort of write it off. And though we're not idealistic and we love the messy vitality of all that, we do believe there's an opportunity to make commentary and to demonstrate how that commentary can be useful in and on its place. So, was mentioned about the Lamplighter School in the introduction and earlier. We've been working for the last couple of years with just great folks from Lamplighter, the board there, the faculty, the students, and our own design team and consultants. And I'm happy to say that we kind of moved in as of last week. Again, it hasn't been professionally shot or anything, but I wanted to share it with you because it's a project that we're really proud of. We think in its own way will make a contribution to the future of education here, especially for kids, first grade through fourth grade. A whole new ideas, I think, about what a school can be. In many ways, schools are often thought of as warehouses for kids, and they're kind of developed in a very serial, kind of repetitive manner in terms of classrooms, and it becomes a systematic kind of deal. So we just finished it, and I'm going to apologize, of course, to Coy, because the landscape is never produced. It evolves over time, and hopefully in a year and a half, this great landscape that Coy's designed will be all in place to complement what we've done. But we wanted to do a building that, again, would complement the existing campus, this campus by O'Neill Ford, and with additions by Frank Welch that has been developed over the last 40 years, and how to develop a series of interventions in that campus. Took a great deal of study, some really wonderful structures. We really love this library here, and we really had to evaluate in the barn that they have, and just these great little courtyards, and really it's a very intimate sort of cluster of spaces, both outside and inside, great learning spaces. There's a real warmth to this campus that we wanted to tap into. And so we had to develop a material logic that was very important, and then just a way to begin to expand the campus by changing their loop road that sort of came through here, the way you came and dropped off and picked up kids, by expanding that loop road to make it much more useful, both in the queue and just in basic circulation. And that expands the campus. And then finding a way to respond to the geometries of the campus in our own way, and responding to the central area, which is where all the kids hang out and play here. And they have this wonderful program, too, with the barn where the kids, raise chickens and they hatch their eggs, and they have a business pro forma in first grade or third grade, whatever it is. I mean, who ever heard of business pro formas being developed by? But I think it's great. These kids literally learn what it is to kind of cultivate something and then promote it and understand whole aspects of business. So our placement of this was considered in many ways a way to engage the center, but also this creek that runs along the edge, and to, in a ways, become a conduit so you can actually move through it and connect to the creek, and have a series, again, of porches. We love porches here. There are outdoor areas for learning and for shade and for entries and transitions, and even allow this to become a more public building at certain times as well. It's an innovation lab with a variety of spaces, maker spaces, shop, environmental science and science, a cooking lab, all of that. So this is what we did. And what we decided to do is, rather than do something very systematic, is something instead that is very responsive to particulars of the site, that begins to scale itself to particulars of the program, and really begin to deal, too, with the material inventory that we took of the existing structure, which was primarily a lot of copper, and there a lot of wood on the inside, and try to get that into pack so that we've wrapped the whole sides and roof in copper. It's just now starting to patina, and it infilled the porches with cypress, and then used the ceiling as well as cypress as a datum. And so you begin to see how things are laid out. And the issue here was control. It's like when you get in a systematic kind of situation, things are not open, they're cellular, and it's really hard to see from one space to another. Here we open it up, and there's all kinds of view corridors through that you can see. And so it's easy to kind of look after kids, see what they're up to. It's not so good for the kids because they can't escape the observation of the adults, but it's great for the folks that work there. And one of the things we wanted to do is use the roof as a way to scale the spaces. So our roof pitches and rolls and really becomes quite dynamic as you move inside, but also from the outside. And so it begins to twist and turn and move and create this variety of spaces, because in so many ways we found the mission at the school to be really based in some ways about variety and dissimilarity and a kind of openness to ideas and to other possibilities. And so we just use local pine that we can get and just nail that up and let it move the way it needs to move. Creates this nice wrapper, and then of course the cypress ceiling acts as this datum that organizes everything, and things just sort of float. So you're constantly in every space connected with nature, connected with light, and connected as well with what's going on. So it feels almost like a pavilion set in the middle of campus. And these are just some of the variety of spaces. We haven't professionally shot it yet, but I just wanted to share it with you today because we're really excited. And this just goes to show you representation. This is a rendering we had to present, of course, to convince the folks at Lamplighter that it's worth doing. And then, here it is. It kind of comes out. So very similar. Hopefully even better. And little moments, so you see this little oculus here, which really becomes a place where kids can hang out, crawl away, if they want to take a break from what's going on in the learning or class area. And they're learning about something else, but here's that little niche, and as it begins to bifurcate from the facade and really becomes a figure in itself along that particular elevation. And then all the transition areas, again, are filled with light and view. So they always feel connected to the larger campus. So there's a sense of never feeling cut off from the campus, but part of something much larger than themselves. And these great sort of learning areas as well, little wells that they learn in, which are taken from the original school, which are carved into the ground. In this case, it's something that's movable, more flexible. And again, the big deep porches where we're imagining students can be outside and learning as well. And they don't go to school in the summer, so not so much, so it's kind of cool here, right? It gets really hot. And we were asked to do a barn as well, thankfully. I mean, a lot of our projects come with barns and agriculture. You're seeing a pattern here. They had a barn, but it was like a rat rodeo at the barn. I mean, it had gotten old and decrepit. It was well loved. I mean, it was, if you went to Lamplighter, you remember that barn. That barn is just part of the kind of institutional pride of the school. But it had to come down, and we had to come up with another barn, and it needed to be red, so we got that. And they have all their chickens, because if you're going to have a chicken and egg program, you got to have a place to put the chickens. So we cantilevered the chicken coop. Here, these are the chickens that don't get bullied, and these are the chickens that get bullied. So we have to separate them, and they come here. Kind of works that way in life sometimes. But, how did we do that? Well, we got to just looking at barns and, just kind of figured out a way. I've sort of showed you a diagram in our chickens, how they move, and kind of that becomes a coop, and we start adding it up, and, here comes the hybrid out of that. And so, again, this idea of the strangely familiar comes to the surface. This thing situates itself right at the campus. It's got its chicken run here and the other animals, goats, pigs. I remember being at the campus once, and I heard over the microphone, do not be alarmed. There is a pig escaped on the campus. Please somebody get the pig. So nature here. All ventilated in the chicken area, so that's this kind of unconditioned space made for chickens. Very simple loft area in the learning classroom. So this really becomes a classroom with its own porch here, and then a glass wall. So while the students are working, they can see the chickens coming and going on the inside. Kind of fun. And we haven't. They've wiped. Somehow the chickens that are there now got sold. There'll probably be chicken dinners or something someplace. They're getting new chickens. They're hatching. There's going to be a big party in May on that if you want to come. So we did a rendering, and here they are working. These are the chickens all hanging out here. And so so here's the space, and we can't wait to this get this really done and just filled with all kinds of chickens in here, and no rats, hopefully. So here we go. So anyways, very excited about it. Looking forward to coming back time and again to see this thing really get finished out. But if you want to see it, try to find a way to kind of, maybe they'll give a walkthrough or tour through it. But very excited. And this is just phase one. We're doing some other interventions too over the next few years. So I want to kind of keep moving as quickly as I can, but I wanted to stop with a little story, as any good Southerner would want to do, is tell a story. We hear all about sustainable practices and best practices and things like that all the time. And increasingly in our little part of the world, I've realized that it isn't so much about the bells and whistles that you put on buildings, but in many ways it's just about how you use something in a different way to extend its life and to provide the past with a future in some ways. Back post-war, around the late 40s, Senator William J. Fulbright, the Fulbright family, they had a mill. And they'd had a mill for many, many years, but they built farm implements, plowshares, axe handles, wagon wheels, things like that out of local oak. And increasingly, they were finding that less and less demand for that. And at the same time they're realizing this, Edward Durrell Stone, who's a great architect from Fayetteville, Arkansas, was designing the first fine arts campus on a university campus at that time. And Senator Fulbright, who wasn't a senator at the time, but Mr. Fulbright came and approached Mr. Stone and said, we've got this problem and with these implements, we really don't know what to do with them, and what do you think? He says, well, I think I could use them. I think we could use them to make a whole line of furniture to furnish my fine arts complex and even to sell on the market. And so chairs became chairs, wagon wheels became stools. The traditional Ozark basket-making craft is used to make these wonderful chase lounges out of big plowshares modified by these legs here. And so a whole line of furniture emerges from this. And these implements are repurposed and given new life. And today, if you go to the Cooper Hewitt Museum, you'll actually see this chase lounge on the display floor. So it's something that's become part of our culture in its own way, just through the idea that what can we do with what we already have? And so many small towns are like that. Lots of towns are secondhand, right? I mean, they've got abandoned buildings, buildings that are people moving out, fabric that's not being used is underperformed or underutilized. And rather than build projects out on the edge of town, usually through a lack of economic will, increasingly we're seeing opportunities to repurpose what we already have. And we're also doing that on campuses as well, to try to keep even the center of campus whole and useful and not just run to the edge every time something new has to happen. So in this line, the way of thinking, the new develops out of the old. The old, however, is changed in the light of the new. And so that idea of resonance really comes to bear. So we had a project. I was director at the time of the architecture school at the University of Arkansas, the Fay Jones School of Architecture, and had an opportunity for our firm and another firm, Polk Stanley Wilcox, to renovate our architecture school and make an addition to it to allow for interior design and landscape architecture programs and architecture to be under one roof. And this is it's a 1930s Beaux-Arts building, what used to be the university library, but architecture had been in it for the last 40 years. And there was a real kind of conundrum here because the university said, we need you to add to the west elevation, and whatever you add has to be the same width and length as this east elevation. And of course, a lot of folks thought, well, you just take that and replicate it over here. And I said, yeah, I mean, that may be something you would do if you were Notre Dame, but, we're the University of Arkansas, so, and would just be anathema for an architecture school in the 21st century. So we proposed something else, perhaps an opportunity to be more didactic in what we had. And so we developed our own structure that would be heavy, be about mass and volume, with post-tension concrete, and using similar materials like limestone, Indiana limestone, except with new technologies, an Indiana limestone rain screen actually made here in Texas, and using new ideas about space to make a complementary and resonant relationship. But we had to resolve the campus issue we had first. Old Main I showed you at the beginning. There's an access that runs all the way through campus to our football stadium. But the problem was once you got through our building, you always had to go around and come back and get on the access because the center was really made for books and really small ceilings, and you just couldn't access it. So we proposed coring out the center and reprogramming it and then doing our addition. And that would transform this figural building from a T into an I or an H. And so that was the strategy, and that was what allowed us to move cranes and stuff in here to actually work on the building. And we looked at, the regulating lines and ways to use similar proportional relationships to make the addition. We, again, told the design review board that it was a didactic moment. That's why it looked the way it did. And what we meant by that was this figure ground diagram shows the traditional building as the mass is more of a ground and the windows and decoration is more figures. Whereas in the new building, we can invert that through technologies, new ideas about space, so that the building is the figure and the window is the ground, one big window. And, our students can learn from that. And so we had to deal with a west elevation, a western sun, so we developed a custom steel and glass brise-soleil fritted glass fins, and the new west entry. And so there's the sort of two elevations, but now that axis is clear, which connects us back to the university community, and now people can walk through and see what's going on inside. So we took two 100-year-old oak trees that had to come down for the new addition, and we repurposed those trees into lumber that then became a 5.5-foot wide by 25-foot long tableau of red oak, starting at the base of the tree, working its way up. And you can tell the whole story of the tree just looking at that. But we also can teach our students now about face grain, long grain, end grain through this tableau. And, we've used it as a social marker in the space. People hang out here. We've had Shakespearean actors on it, mariachi bands. I mean, it's just all kinds of things going on in this axis with all the artwork in the vitrines. It really becomes a very active space. And underneath the underbelly of the figure is an exhibition gallery that we've never had before that faces onto the campus here. People can interact with. And so our first show was a retrospective of Faye Jones, of course, movable walls that control the sun, transparencies that connect new and old together. And we light it up at night and it becomes this lantern in the middle of the campus. And so often you see architecture schools in the campus and they're just like hermetically sealed but lit 24/7. It's like an insane asylum or something like, so here people can see what's going on and we're reconnected. It's been kind of liberating for our students. And a lot of preservation involved as well, really re-enhancing the old, restoring all the windows and the glass and the skylights and the plaster work. We took the old reading room of the library, becomes a new studio space with custom designed lights, and cleaned up all the systems and integrated them into the detailing. But our biggest space is a reference room that always had poor lighting and poor acoustics. So we blew the top off of it, programmed it with studios up above, and took a 2,500 square foot fabric skin that backlit it for it to become even light in the space. And then that fabric ceiling is perforated too, so it helps with the acoustics. We did all the detailing in the space. And then we cut a hole 8 feet by 20 foot right through the middle. So there's a window to the sky, so nature, the light in the sky is dropped right into the middle of school. And we can move those panels around right through the slot, which I'll show you in a minute. Of course, if you go upstairs and look into the vitrine, it's really like intensely red because that's, the hogs, But I always tell students, if you've been up for 2 or 3 nights, go up there and stare into that. Don't have another Red Bull. I mean, it'll get you fried up. Get back to work. So yeah, here's the big slot here, and then the slot cut through the wall that all these panels can move and make it a more flexible space. This is where all the major design crits happen at the end of every semester. And so the space between the old and new becomes a joint, which is programmed as exit stairs on each side, all glassed in, become social with their integrated benches and pin-up spaces as well, that all these doors cover plotters and sinks and can be closed up and become a crit space. Really tough labs, all out of post-tension concrete. We used a concrete consultant that worked with Ando on the Pulitzer Museum, so we got great C2 concrete that looks really quite lovely. Great learning spaces, the 200-seat auditorium. Underneath is the student lounge, all wrapped in felt. We call it the boneless chicken ranch. Kids come in there, and it's not made for study. You just come in, hang out, sleep, chill, do whatever you do on the internet, that sort of thing. And then we have showers next door, which is great. Of course, the first semester after it opened, we had 2 students living rent-free school, so that we had to solve that problem. But we also we split the screen here. I was teaching at Cornell while I was designing this, and I really love Rem Koolhaas's architecture school at Cornell. It's a great place to teach. But the auditorium had just one big screen, and the first 5 rows no one ever sat on because they couldn't get their neck back that far. So we split the screens for smaller venues and larger venues here. That also gave us a faculty lounge here where we get together and gossip about the students. Not some natural light, but it can also be sealed off for different lectures and things. Upstairs, monastic, like faculty offices, green roof, outdoor classroom here in seminar space, and really just a place for the students to take lunch, a place of refuge and prospect. And I have to say this has been absolutely transformative for our program. It has really brought us all together, more collaborative. Things are happening between the disciplines now. It's and taking a lot of pressure off the dean. He can worry about other things instead of raising money for a building. So, anyways, and you see the generations now, the oldest building on campus, the mid-generation, and now the newest generation. So I want to end with these 2 projects in the town, one in the town of Gentry, Arkansas, town of 2,500 people with only one industry in the entire town. It's a Little Debbie snack food plant. The other major business is a wild country safari zoo. So you drive through the landscape, and there are not chickens, but emus, large chickens, emus and monkeys that chase you, and you throw Wonder Bread out the window. So that's the place, and it's a cool little town. But they had a downtown that's seen better days, and they've had this dream of having a public library. And they had a public library, but it was privately funded. That's how difficult it was to keep it going. But they were able to buy an old hardware store, a 100-year-old hardware store that was no longer being used for $1 from one of the city sons. And they really, really were hoping to turn it into a library, a community room, genealogy department, a place to exhibit city artifacts from their history. And this was the building. And the head of the library said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I think if we tear it down and start over, it'll be great because it'll be cheaper and less headache. And they were like offended. They said, no, you don't understand. This has been the socio-economic hub of our city for nearly 100 years. And I said, we don't want that. And the mayor said, yeah, I used to eat barbecue beaver out from underneath when I was a kid in that storefront. And I will eat anything in Arkansas. So it was like, well, what to do? And they said, well, we don't want a false history. We want just a new identity, something that puts it into the future. So after about 2 weeks and rolls of yellow trace and 9B pencil working across it and a little bit of bourbon and a lot of cussing, trying to figure out what to do. And I finally came to the conclusion that the best thing I could do was nothing, is maybe don't do anything. That, in fact, this is an artifact, a ruin in itself. And I got to thinking about how artifacts, everyday artifacts, are elevated in their significance very often by the way they're framed. We're in a museum. If you see museums and they take a pocket watch and they frame it in a particular way, it becomes more significant. And I thought, what if we did that with this building? And all the ticks and wrinkles it's achieved over time has an expressive character that we could see as an asset. The parapet's been blown off. It's been patched together with bricks because it's in Tornado Alley when storms hit it. And I was like, well, we're just not going to do much. And so we came up with a series of details I like to call soap bubble details, where we built on the outside of the openings, and We built new type of storefront and columns and doors and other types of elements to reconfigure the building through elements. A new parapet made out of steel here, and just to kind of cobble it back together and make this wonderful hybrid of old and new. And here it is. And we had to do all of this for $108 a square foot. And it's still the least expensive public library in the state of Arkansas. Now, it took 7 years to do it because it had to be bid several times, and it was not easy to do. And we had a really tough city council. They didn't like me because they saw that I went to Syracuse University and called me a city slicker, even though I lived there for 20-something years. That's the mayor right there. And the mayor owns a tattoo parlor. And his name is Wes Hogue, and he's the best politician I've ever met. In fact, I kind of wish he would have ran for president, honestly. He helped us through all the ups and downs of small-town politics to get this building built. And, you know, it's really all about the details, but it's also about the planning. Very simple stacks and reading area here, the community room here with its kitchen, up top, the genealogy department, a librarian, and then a whole host of exhibits. Little Debbie Snack Food Park right here, they gave money. A little plaza in the back and a future home for their fire truck, antique fire truck. And the little kit of parts drawing that shows all the different parts that we designed and put back together, even including a beacon over the old skylight hole, light it up at night, and it really becomes quite lovely. And it's a kind of seed project to really kind of reactivate downtown. Structural glazing holds these large pieces of glass over the surface of the steel fins. The lateral structure actually becomes shelves for new journals. It really becomes a transparent interface between the street and the reading room. The ceiling is all pressed tin, antique. They didn't want to mess with that, so the mayor got county prisoners to come in and take them out one tile at a time, give them something to do, and put it off-site, got it restored, brought it back. We did different ways to do the HVAC and the lighting. We had to replace columns, so we wrapped the columns in books and in glass, and we put lights in the bottom and bounce it off the ceiling, and that creates the kind of diffuse lighting in the reading area. The old lift becomes an exhibit for buggies that used to be sold on the second floor and brought down and hooked up to horses. And there's lots of exhibits throughout. Heartwood pine floor restored, the librarian all alone here. She confessed to me, I really don't like people, I like books. And so we kept her away from everybody. And just simple things like this, just to take an existing opening and design, we really see details as spatial propositions. And so thinking them in a more volumetric way and bending that north light around to the inside, and just a nice moment where the sacred and the secular can kind of come together. And the great thing about this library for us, I mean, it won like national awards and publications, but what was important to us was that when we started this project, there were 300 library card holders in this town of 2,500. And today there are over 2,300 library card holders in this town of 2,500. So it demonstrates, the power of architecture to strengthen institutions and to be transformative in the city. So I'd like to end tonight with a little project that we did a few years back for a congregation of Eastern Orthodox Christians who were worshiping in a rundown office building in downtown Springdale, Arkansas. And they have a wonderful aestheticized form of worship, rituals and symbols and icons, and it was really being compromised, as you can see, by having to worship here. And one of their members died and left them some money, and so they went out and they bought a 3.5-acre site backed up to the city park, looking out onto which is now I-49, it says I-540 here, they just changed it here. And they're surrounded by other churches, big mega churches here. And they wanted to be part of that community and be seen from the interstate and really just have a presence in the community. And they only had $100 a square foot for the building after they had purchased the site. So they approached us and they asked us if we could design this for them, something of this nature. And we said, well, yeah, I mean, if we make it out of cardboard or something, we could do that. But I said, we don't want to go this route either. These are adventures in religious architecture where I live. The cross on the metal building, having grown up as a Southern Baptist, I get it. But what I don't get is when your SUV or your truck costs more than the building, it raises questions for me. I always ask people, would you live here? And the answer usually is no. And I say, well, why would you worship here? I mean, what's that? What are you communicating here? So it's a set of values that can be debated. But I said, I told them, I said, man, we don't want to go there. And they said, well, we agree, but since you can't build this, could you take this and convert it into a sanctuary and fellowship hall? And I said, you mean like tear it down and build on its same footprint? And they go, no, you take the welding shop, it's a welding shop, and just convert it. And, I'm thinking about my mentor, Faye Jones, and Thorn Crown Chapel, and I'm thinking, God, our first commission for a church, and it's a welding shop. So, I felt like Rodney Dangerfield of architecture here. So, what to do? So we went back to origins. What could we do? What is it that we could do that doesn't cost anything as an architect? And it's scale and proportion. That's what we're supposed to know how to do, and it doesn't cost anything. So I've never had a client say, hey, could you do me a out of scale, really unresolved, a diagram that, nobody can figure out how to use? I don't think most architects have had that, but somehow we keep making them. So we went back and looked at Greek proportioning systems, the origins of the church, and came up with a system that would allow us to reconfigure the church into a whole series of exercises in the golden mean. And then we mixed in a little Corbusier right here, because everything tastes a little better with Corb. All the icons, the colors, and this sacred face facing the interstate. And we achieved this by leaving the existing building as it was, wrapping it in a new skin. We didn't even take the metal skin off. We just rewrapped it. We added 10 feet to the front so that we could have a narthex that would move north-south to connect us to the axes east-west, which was very important to the congregation. And then these movable walls that would connect the fellowship and congregation sanctuary and overflow, or just open it up for a more social space. And we use a box rib metal system right off the shelf. We customize the corners and the transition details to give it kind of abstract quality. Everything is coursed out, even the doors and windows. That's a fire exit door that we put concrete there so you know where it is. That's it from the interstate. A lot of our projects also come with cows. And then we light it up at night, and you can see it from the interstate. And, just cutting a section through the narthex, Father John's office here, the niche for St. Nicholas, their patron saint, a return air duct that's actually a cabinet of local white oak. The counter has a steel channel in it filled with sand where candles go. You pick a candle up, you come beneath the tower of the blood of Christ, and you move in to the sanctuary. So this is it here. You move in, and then we cut one window in the old building to let east light in the morning. And the iconostasis is just made out of bar stock plate, little angles, to make that with all their icons. And now this whole wall, these walls are filled with icons. Father John and his regalia, the after evening light from Mass coming in and hitting the saints really comes alive with the blue light. But the one problem we had ongoing was the lack of a dome. They had to have a dome, and we couldn't put it on top of the building because of the steel structure. But they let us put it in the ceiling. But the problem was with the dome, a fiberglass dome that we spec'd, they couldn't afford. And the contractor said, I don't think I could build one custom that it would be that nice. And I said, well, what are we going to do? And he said, well, let me think about it. So he came back a few days later and says, I've got a friend out in the mountains, lives about 20 miles away, and he loves beer. And if we give him 2 cases of beer, he's got a satellite dish here that they can share with us. And so we're in the middle of construction, and this is like manna from heaven. So we bring it in, and it's its own natural lath, right? And we skim coat it in plaster. We jack it up on the scissor lift, and they've got their dome. There you go. So Go ahead. Now, one of the building committee members was so excited about this. He said, you know what? I know where we can get a throne for the bishop when he comes to bless our church. I said, oh, that's great. He says, yeah, it's walnut. It's got crushed purple velvet upholstery, and I can get it for free. And I said, where? He goes, well, it's a part of an ad campaign at a local liquor store. I said, oh. And he said, they'll give it to me when the campaign's over. He said, I just don't know what we're going to do with the embroidered CR on it. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, Crown Royal. And I said, oh, yeah. And about that time, Father John had overheard us, and he walked over and he said, no, Christ the Redeemer. And so we get that chair. So nonetheless, that's how we roll in Arkansas. So in 2013, we got a phone call from Elizabeth Henry from Washington, D.C., who's head of the National Honor Awards program. And she says, I just want to inform you that your church has won a National Honor Award. But what we were really impressed with was the cost of this building, at $100 a square foot. And so we went back and looked through the whole history of the awards program, and we discovered that this is the least expensive building to ever win a National Honor Award. And we were really, really, I think, warmed by that, because it kind of underscored what we've been trying to do for the last 25 years, which is to demonstrate that architecture can happen anywhere, it can happen at any scale, at any budget, and for anyone. Thank you. How many questions? Two. I know everybody's stunned into silence, but they don't let me get off the stage unless I get two questions. That's in the contract. Come again? Well, no, I didn't work with Fay Jones. He was a friend and mentor, but he helped guide me in lots of ways. I think what I learned, though, from him is he always told me to be accessible, never cut yourself off. This was a guy who, no matter what he was doing, if you needed him, if somebody came to visit and wanted to sign a book or do whatever it was, he would come to the office, even if he wasn't coming to the office, and just spend lots of time with people. So one of the things we try to do is when people come visit us, we just drop what we're doing and we spend time with them. We want to welcome people as part of the community. I think that's one thing I learned from him. I think another thing I learned is I asked him one day, I said, how in the world did you maintain the level of quality in your work for over 50 years? I mean, it's really impressive. I was just really starting my own firm at the time. And he said, well, it was quite simple. He said, I decided to start my firm the way I wanted to end it. He goes, Marlon, he says, you don't wake up at 50 and decide you're going to do good work. You have to start out with a certain set of principles that help you direct circumstance rather than allowing circumstance to direct you. And so that was a powerful lesson, and it has in many ways guided us as we, tried to build our own practice. So those are just a couple things. Plus, he was a great storyteller. He had. I don't have time. I told some last night, some of his good Frank Lloyd Wright jokes, but anyways. Who else? Yes. Well, I knew enough to know that I didn't know. And I was in Boston, and I looked around, and I was like, wow, look at all the talent here. And, I'm not independently wealthy, I'm not a blue blood, and I don't have a really pedigree degree. I was like, what am I going to do? And I said, I got to get out of Boston. And I had heard about Fay Jones and what he had done to, rather than go to the world, he had let the world come to him in some ways. And I thought there was a model of potentially a practice, that there would be opportunity there, and you could get things built. If you've ever tried to build anything in Boston or New York, it's like watching the grass grow. It's, you know, just all the hurdles and things that you have to go through to get anything built. And I could come here and out to the Midwest and South and really do something. And there's lots of great examples of great architecture that happens. And there's this void between the two coasts, you know, that obviously needs to be filled. And there's a lot of great things happening out here that don't get enough attention, I think. And I think what's happening in Dallas is an example, for example. Often better than what goes on in those other centers of fashion, you know. So did I imagine it? No. Did I hope for it? Yes, because coming out and making the move was, you know, there was a calculated risk in that, but, you know, it was about opportunity. And I think that's all you can ask for in many ways from this profession is opportunity, and you have to go from there. So. Okay.